hopefully we won't need it. Besides, it's kind of muddy.
Milestone for you. Right now, I couldn't go bad out there. I'm just about to get in and pay all the damn bills. Yeah, people take care of it.
Yes. Very Brunswick. Well,
Didn't make last Fridays. There was tour of the Ashland tour of Nyanza. Both the chiefs were here, and trying to get him to agree. Switch the form guy to somewhere else.
I'm not sure I want to wait that long. 56 yet?
There's always a moment. You always know the public servants that can retire at any point if they want to.
Except my wife and kids might not agree with that, that's right. I apologize for the weather, but for those of you who have not been to Ashland before or don't visit us too often, I guarantee you when the sun's out, about a mile in any direction, it's truly God's country. And we welcome you back anytime. On behalf of the town of Ashland and the Board of Selectmen, I would like to recognize and welcome several individuals involved in the Nyanza project. I'd like to welcome Julie Balaga, EPA Region 1 Administrator, Mr. Daniel Greenbaum, who has not arrived yet. He is Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, and Lieutenant James Hughes of the Army Corps of Engineers. Lieutenant Colonel. I would also like to recognize Mr. David Lederer, past EPA Remedial Project Manager for the Nyanza site, for his tireless contribution over the years. And to Pam Shields, who is over there, current EPA Remediation Manager for Phase 2 and 3 of the Nyanza site, for her future tireless efforts. And a special thanks to someone we've got to know and love, Ira Nettleman of the Army Corps, for a professional dedication and perseverance seldom seen. Thank you very much. I also would like to welcome our Senator Ed Burke, our Representative David Magnani, our erstwhile Town Manager Paul Sharon, who has also suffered over the past couple of years with what needed to be done, Richard Cavaniero from the EPA, Charlotte Renegum from the DEP, Pat Donahue from the DEP, and I know I'm leaving other people out here. Joan Miles, Lisa West, who I just met, Chris Turk, James Coleman, Pat Donahue from the earlier years, Joe Fitzgerald, and I'm down here too, so I'll welcome myself. And then I will turn it over to people that you'll probably want to hear from more than I. Starting in 1917 and proceeding through the closing down of the Nyanza Company in 1978, various companies used this site to manufacture dyes for the textile industry. Throughout those years, the site was used as a dumping ground for the toxic byproducts of the dye manufacturing process. In 1981, a group of Ashland residents, led by Holly Bukowski, right over there, and joined by Laura Kelly, Arthur Shapiro, Richard Brown, Beverly Dort, among others, formed a citizens group called ACE, Ashland Advocates for a Clean Environment. Their purpose and goal was to bring heightened awareness to the community and to the federal and state governments regarding the environmental disaster commonly called Nyanza. In 1982, Nyanza was named a federal Superfund site, and the decade-long process that brings us here today was started. Most ceremonies are opening or groundbreaking in nature. Happily, this ceremony is an ending or a closing of a process that leaves an area and a community far better off than when it started. For that, all of us here today are thankful and grateful. At a time in history when $1 billion plus is spent on an airplane and $1 million plus is spent on a bomb, it's special to be here today to commemorate our tax dollars being returned and invested in our own community to improve where we live and how we feel about ourselves. Your contribution to our community. We look forward to working with you in the future and continuing as the Regional Administrator of EPA for a few comments.
Thank you, sir. Me on where we are today reminded me that a year ago you couldn't walk on this site without very special protective clothing. You'd need some kind of safety training to be here, or you probably would have had to have some kind of health monitoring. And when you look around here, you know the enormous success that we're here to acknowledge. This is a vital milestone in the cleanup of this site, and from EPA's perspective, we feel really very good about it. We have to tell you that none of this would happen without an enormous amount of citizen involvement and community caring. And it is part of the Superfund cleanup that allows us as an agency to work very closely with citizens. And the selectman has identified some people who have been involved here. I'd like to also thank, first of all, the selectman and his offices for working collaboratively with EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, but also the group that he identified, ACE, the Ashland Advocates for a Clean Environment, for the Nyanza CAC, that's the Citizens Advisory Committee, and for the Ashland LEPC, that's the Local Emergency Planning Committee. Quite frankly, they have been almost models for what we hope will happen in the future at other sites. These groups have taken very seriously their role as serving as a conduit to the public, sharing information, making sure that there were citizen nights, that people knew what was going on and what the status of this project was. And we really cannot, in fact, ever do the job as an environmental protection agency without that pressure and questioning and nagging, if you will, and participation by the citizens. And so we are very, very grateful. The commissioner is here. We just started, Dan, come in, to build the $14 million project that we're standing on today. It's really, some of the statistics are awesome, and so I want to share them with you. For this project, we consolidated over 60,000 cubic yards of sludges. That's enough to cover a football field to a height of 40 feet. It is an enormous amount of sludge. We've moved over 250,000 cubic yards of soil to shape the cap. We've covered the material buried here with a 13-acre impermeable cover that is 4 feet thick. So that this is an enormously challenging engineering feat and a vital piece of the cleanup of this site. We've also excavated an upgradient trench that we created by blasting through 10 feet of solid bedrock. This is a major engineering feat. Basically, at the bottom of what we were doing as an agency was to prevent direct human contact with contaminated soils and to protect the contamination from entering both the ground and the surface water. So that was our priority as an agency. Obviously, this is a major engineering feat, and in addition to this enormous long-term engineering project in 1987, EPA did declare an emergency at the site. We've also removed 3,000 tons of contaminated material, and we've incinerated 600 tons on site. The short-term actions serve to ensure that the public safety the public would be protected and to circumvent any imminent danger from the site conditions. So talk about a challenge. This was an enormous challenge for some very talented people, and while the selectmen did identify some of the people, I want to make sure that you know who the EPA people, our own site team, and Dave will be here on the next phases of the project, which we will talk about later. A lot of in fact, to identify success story, which is what we have here, and it is a success story that all of us join in. Let me also tell you that Doug is involved. The project is not an EPA project. I've got to reaffirm for you once, and one will tell you a little bit about that. They've assumed 10% of the capital costs, the $14 million, and will perform 30 years of operation and maintenance of the cap. And I reiterate to you that I appreciate being here.
Thank you very much for your comment.
State and with the community. It certainly is a milestone event for the community, the organizations, and for the Superfund program. Over the past 3 years, we've been actively involved in assisting EPA in the cleanup of this site. From the preliminary design reviews through the remediation and the ultimate containment and capping of the site, the Corps has worked closely with many of you. Although the road has not always been smooth, everyone's willingness to talk and resolve issues has allowed us to reach this milestone. This cooperation will not stop here. We still have much work to do over the next several years to clean up the damage on the site. We're currently preparing to work with the EPA and the state to design the groundwater treatment facility and a study for the cleanup of contaminated sediments in the Sudbury River. This site is one of just many in Massachusetts where the Corps of Engineers, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Commonwealth are partners. Others include the Charles George landfill in Kingsborough, the Norwood PCB site, the Baird McGuire site in Holbrook, and the New Bedford Harbor. In addition, we also have and are continuing to support the EPA on projects in the other New England states. As a result of our successful relationship and our progress on these cleanups, the New England Division has recently been designated as the design and construction center for all Corps Lead Superfund projects in New England. This designation is significant, and we are the first Corps district outside of Missouri River Division to be so designated. It will afford us an expedited...
Many people. These are sites that have been sitting around for some time. Everyone has been frustrated, but what we see here today is the kind of change and cleanup and progress that we're going to have to make. It's costly, it's time-consuming, it's difficult to figure out exactly what to do, but I think today's event is a sign that the Superfund program, particularly in this region, is working and working well. This is not the only of these events that I've been to with Julie Belaga, and I think it's a sign that we are seeing these steps finally occurring well and professionally and extraordinarily safely throughout the region. And I think we're pleased to have in this region probably the lead section of the Corps in doing that. They've done a tremendous job. The local leadership, this is a partnership. In many projects is a word. In this case, we actually at one point in this project had a hotline set up between West and Bedford. These people day in and day out are trying to make decisions, work with their counterparts, and make them happen. And in this case, we have. Thank you very much.
This event, I just want to make 3 brief points. As some of you know, I used to swim in the Mercury Lake swamp down here. I didn't intend to. I was just a lousy skier. I'd fall through the ice, and I'd come up all red, covered with mercury dye. So there's a very personal sense of victory here that this site is not going to be exposed to other children who, right over the hill, I remember coming down, and the people together can do. We've been taking a long, hard ride, I think, for the last 5 or 6 years, and government has been taking a bashing at every level. It's been accused of being incompetent, it's been accused of wasting resources and not dedicating them to the purpose for which they were intended. This is clearly an example.
I regret that we as a government and as a society didn't react much sooner to the open and notorious dumping that occurred here for 60 or 70 years. I can remember as a very young legislator many years ago listening to stories of people who used to hang out their laundry to dry living on Cherry Street. And when the sheet was dry, it would also be flecked with various colors of paint-like material, red, blue, whatever happened to be being made that particular day. So it's not as though that there was dumping here in the midnight hour and nobody really knew about it. We knew what was going on, and yet there wasn't the will, the recognition back even in the 1970s to stop it. And it was only after the company went into bankruptcy and then there was no source of payment from the corporate sector to pay for the cleanup work that the government then had to step in. It is nice to be part of a project in which we can demonstrate, we would argue, value for the taxpayer. I think we ought to also recognize the role of Congressman Joseph Early, people like Senator Kennedy, being able to secure Superfund funding and the extension of the program back in the early and mid-1980s. In a sense, and I don't want to denigrate at all from their efforts, it was a little easier for them because the federal government can simply print more money. And we engage in a tremendous amount of deficit spending at the federal level. Now it's our turn as a state government to make sure that all this work was not in vain, and it's our responsibility as Commissioner to pay with 100% of our state tax dollars to maintain and survey this property. I don't know how much that is going to cost, but it seems to me we ought not to compromise that responsibility on the part of the state government. And as I say, as we talk about where does the money come from, I don't know if we as legislators should be promising, as some in the government now do, no new taxes, no increases in fees, and yet somehow the state is going to maintain the integrity of its responsibility to this Superfund site and to others across the state. So we are embarking upon some responsibilities as a state, and we can't look to the deep pocket of the federal government, at least for this particular part of the project, any longer. And I hope that, Polly, that the ACE and all...
Go from here. What are the next steps in this process? We're obviously not done yet.
No, we're not done. This is an important milestone. An additional $7.5 million for 5 years, for the next 5 years, to clean the contaminated groundwater near or around the site, so that will be ongoing. And we understand the enormous concern of the Sudbury River, and so the connection between this site and the Sudbury River is very ongoing. Studies of mercury contamination in the Sudbury River continue, and we assume another record of decision for the final part of this project to be signed in late 1992. So we have 2 more pieces to go, but frankly the pivotal piece, the real, the very visible cleanup of the contamination that sits on this site is what we are celebrating today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we have. I know. I hear about you all the time.
Plan to arrest Is it left? It's going to be left.
Where the bentonite mixture was created, which is a, how big I think it's our bentonite layer. or 8-inch thick bentonite layer that we've got as part of the cap. And what happened here was soil was mixed with clay to form a mixture which had the correct capability to reject water flow through it. And how many yards? You know how many yards of bentonite we mixed here?
Mixed about 20.
Oh, you kidding? Would I do that in front of
Here at the beginning, this is where you used to see a spring coming out of the side of the hill, and as you can see, it doesn't exist anymore. It dried up. As soon as the cap went on, it dried up. Famous last words, but we haven't seen it since the cap went on.
So you're saying that the spring was really water?
It was water coming out of the capped
coming
area.
Through it, oozing through and out.
Right, and leaving the site, and now it's dried up. Drilling of wells that we've done over the last few years, and we've recently tested these, and basically they're clean, they're non-hazardous. So we'll be getting rid of them.
You might want to tell the rest of them about this trench. So that's what I described, but it's hard to...
What you're looking at here is the easternmost side of the diversion trench, which is at its deepest point is over there now. Chris, how deep is the trench at its deepest point? Is Chris here?
Well, actually, it's the highest point. It's approximately elevation 240 wall and trickles along into the trench. This side feeding the Trolley Brook wetland, and the west side feeding Chemical Brook.
So the reason, the rationale is to keep water from this area.
From the contamination.
Okay. Is the trench lined?
No, it allows to seep. The highest point of the trench is 4 feet lower than the lowest point of contamination. And the contamination dry from the bottom up as the cap protects the contamination from moisture from the top down.
What we'll see when we get over there.
Hi, good. Joe, I'm going to head up.
No, there's nothing up here.
Oh, really? Wow. Way up there. You've never seen the trench, have you, Pat?
I've seen it, yeah, not completed.
Yeah, they really fixed it up the last couple of months. They got all the boulders out of it.
Did they just sort of grade it?
Yeah, they just don't get too close. No, they don't want to lose you in the trench.
They love carrying me over. I don't care about the wall.
Yeah, you can see right there.
That's why we wanted to make sure you were going to get here. You got the fence up there to keep me out.
It's more in the middle. Oh, really? It's university here in town, the Warren Center. Oh, really? Yeah. So I coordinate the services, the conference group. So that's something that I wanted to do for a long time.
Sedimentation basin, upgrading of it, which collects all the water from the hill.
Okay. I'm just going to be out of here at 12:30.
What time you got?
How many acres does it have?
Different sites have had very different dynamics.
Maybe that explains. Sometimes number one, number two, the other thing that happens is
5,000 cubic yards of solid boulder or ledge rock was crushed.
Well, what we're looking down on here, this is the big vista, is the sedimentation basin. What this sedimentation basin receives is the flow from the cap, from the perimeter drain, which drains the surface water flow off the whole cap. The east side of the cap, the other side, has a perimeter drain, and so does this. They come together at a point near those two drums down there, which we'll see in a minute. And when it rains hard, like it did this morning, the flow goes into the sedimentation basin. And if the flow conditions are right and it's high enough, the flow is then directed into that next area, which is the restored wetland. That wetland that before we came here had, I believe, 4,000 parts per million mercury in many places. It's a horribly contaminated wetland, and basically we've dug the whole thing out and we've reseeded it. So what we'll be doing over the next year is monitoring the progress of this wetland restoring itself to its former state. That's what Pam will be doing.
Great. A lot of people.
Okay.
This is the outlet of the perimeter drain. This outlet here is the discharge point for the perimeter drain, which rings the whole cap. And what that does is it collects all the surface runoff and all of the shallow groundwater runoff off the top of the cap. All this water is clean, and discharges down this slope here into our bed basin and eventually into the wetlands across the one bedrock and one superficial well. And they ring the whole cap, and what the idea of that is to monitor the groundwater as part of the second phase of the project.
See that we're going to drag you down the Sudbury River and put your feet in the water. No, that we talked about. You're going to have red at the end. That's not what I have to do.
And then I heard that we also
No, you can't see it in the light.
might be over
Blade comes up to a crack in the pavement.
because